2, 1, rolling.
This is Story Code, the podcast about the business of story and storytelling. I'm James Kirkham. Let's get into it. Andrew Lownie spent 30 years as one of Britain's top literary agents, establishment, discreet. Then he started digging into the royal family, and he kept going. The Mountbattens, the Duke of Windsor's Nazi ties, Prince Andrew, Epstein. His latest book is so damaging, the Sunday Times called it among the most lurid ever published about a senior royal. He sued Simon & Schuster to get it out, and he'd do it again. This is a conversation about the stories power doesn't want told. Andrew, tell me a story.
Well, I think the story is of someone who was, I think, pretty conformist, pretty establishment, who realized that actually the story that I kind of was brought up with wasn't the real story, and that our history is curated by rich and powerful people. People are preventing people or readers from getting the truth. And that kind of radicalized me. And I've been on a mission ever since to try and tell the truth about the past. People said, why are you writing about Andrew? He's so boring. But actually, he is a way into a bigger story, which is the financial corruption at the heart of the royal family and the lack of oversight. So the establishment, of course, are nervous because once the royal family gets challenged, so you begin to challenge the government. Why haven't the files on Andrew as a trade envoy? Why have they been closed for the last 5 years against over 100, 200 requests from people like me and others for them to be open, as they should be open. So they're suddenly in the frame. The police are in the frame, and then the whole thing begins to unravel. I was a Conservative parliamentary candidate in 1992. I haven't been a member of a political party, probably since then. But I'm certainly, I would say, somewhere in the middle, but I would say moving leftwards as I get older.
Well, to be honest, in that era, John Major, who now, whenever I hear John Major speak now, sounds like one of the most sensible, wise men I've ever heard.
Yes,
but the Overton window shifts, right?
Exactly, it shifts. I was part of a sort of slightly paternalistic one nation tradition. My father was a judge, I think gave me quite strong sense of right and wrong. He suffered because he was slightly outside the British establishment as a Scottish person. I remember my grandfather kind of bankrupting the family, fighting, and he was a kind of an early environmentalist, and he fought against a dam which he thought would affect animals and stuff. There's something there's a gene that I've clearly inherited, which I didn't realise I had.
There's something there for sure, and it really is a mission. You are all over every one of my feeds right now. Let's get straight into that, because I find it fascinating, and you are cutting through in every sort of conceivable way, and I mean that as a compliment. It's very noisy out there. I think you described this as Monarchy's Metoo moment. Tell us a little about that. Give us a little bit of that depth and perspective, maybe from the start point of seeing Prince Andrew in a police car.
Yeah, well, that was a rather shocking picture. And actually it's interesting. If you talk to people close to him, they'll say that he's quite cocky. He doesn't think he's going to be charged. He's more concerned about where he's going to park his cars. But that picture, I think, showed a man who was terrified, who realized the seriousness of the position he's in. And I think until then, he thought he was invincible. And I think the royals do think the same. There's now a panic at Buckingham Palace because clearly they've been shutting the story down for years. And now it's caught up with them because of the Epstein links, and they're going to have to justify themselves. And the firewalls are going around the king. But we have this extraordinary position with the royal family. They're exempt from freedom of information laws. There's no parliamentary scrutiny. They can actually determine law before it gets to the statute book. They don't pay tax. Their finances are very opaque. Their wills are sealed. And there's no register of their business activities. And there's still this huge omerta around them from people who want to have nice, big, thick invitations on the mantelpiece, and a culture of deference and secrecy. And so they've been able to get up to anything they want to. And that's why the Chinese and Russian secret services have been able to penetrate the British establishment through the royal family, here, and I would say also abroad, so easily.
Yeah, you've described it, I believe, before as there's almost a vulnerability around royals, some of which, for example, exhibit greed as a natural trait. Tell us a little bit more about that, because I think for many listeners, people viewing this podcast for the first time, certainly people from abroad who've always sort of assumed there's still a weight to the royal family and perhaps a trust that's imbued within it. Tell us a little more about that sort of natural vulnerability that exists.
Monarchy survives only on the basis of trust and respect from the public. That's the deal. You do the public duties and you'll get the privileges, and we won't ask too many questions. So that's changing. And it's changing because they were taking advantage of that position. And they've lost, I think, their moral authority. They were meant to be the sort of the family of the nation. And they were meant to set the good example and to kind of bring us together and bind us together, particularly at times of national crisis and tragedy. And they've kind of abrogated this by basically sticking their noses in the trough and seeing what they can get out of this. And the two worst offenders, though they're not the only ones, are Sarah Ferguson and the former Prince Andrew, who I suppose all their lives have wanted to live a slightly more jet-setty life than really they should really have been allowed. And Meghan and Harry are the same. I mean, they want to have all the perks of mixing with the real A-listers without the income to do it. But they realise that they could monetize that position in order to get some money.
There's so much I want to get into, but let's just start with you so that, again, our viewers really understand. You are tenacious and have been relentless in this pursuit. I believe you wrote to 3,000 people individually, for example, as part of your own seeking and searching for truth. Tell us a little bit about what that actually means, about the hard work that you put in to uncover what's important right now.
Well, for researching Entitled took 4 years. I've only used about 10% of the material, so I've got lever arch files filled with literally a chronology of their life from day by day. I got hold of all the cuts going back to the 1970s or earlier 60s, and so made this huge database of information of people that they came across. But I also did things like looked on LinkedIn for anyone who'd been to Gordonston, anyone who'd been in Abu Dhabi, for example, because of expatriates there. I used the electoral roll, social media, following through on comments in newspapers and in podcasts. People often wrote in with stories and experiences, traced them. So it's quite a big job. Of those 3,000, only 300 responded, but about 150 were on the record. And then one person will often lead to another. Then actually people will open up. So I got, for example, Andrew's former commanding officer in the Falklands, his naval mentor, heads of the Foreign Office, senior diplomats, close school friends, quite a lot of members of staff. Andrew was away at sea. He never, very, very rarely gave interviews, whereas Sarah Ferguson was always giving interviews, and she had a huge PR team feeding stories out, how the Queen loved her and how well she got on with Diana. Not always true, but there was a lot of noise out there from her. So trying to get that balance between, when you're writing about two characters, to keep the narrative going, interesting, enough depth that people feel they understand the story, but not too much detail that they get a bit bogged down.
What you're describing, it sounds like a forensic detective. Do those skills come naturally to you too? Where does that come from?
Yeah. Well, I think the biographer is a detective, and you are following a trail. I often think that writers, well, it's the same with journalists. That's why they make good secret agents. I mean, because you're assimilating a lot of information. You've got to find it. You've got to win trust from people, and then you have to use that information. Biography is a bit like a Seurat painting. It's a series of pointillism. It's a series of dots, where the picture begins to emerge. The colours are always a little bit different. And the problem is you often get contradictory reports, and then you have to work out, are people remembering incorrectly, or is actually the story not true? So, for example, a number of people said to me, we had a drink with Andrew, and he was drinking brandy. And I said, well, he doesn't drink. Oh, well, I'm sure he had a brandy. And when you hear that story time and time again, then you think, well, actually, the story of him not drinking isn't true.
And as we sit here today, so much perhaps that you'd been uncovering and discovering is not least been seen to be true, but en masse, millions of people around the world are tuning in and adopting the same stance, shall we say. How does it make you feel now? Does it give you relief? Does it give you satisfaction? Is it giving you a yearning and a thirst frankly, to uncover more because you know there is more to bring out. Like, how do you sit in this current climate where everyone is tuning in to this moment?
Well, it's exciting because I was vilified when I said, for example, the Queen had allowed Andrew to behave this way and protected him. Now the royal family themselves are making that. They're basically to protect Charles. They are throwing the Queen under the bus. And I had a lot of trouble. People were trying to discredit me, didn't take me seriously. And it's interesting, going into the TV studios now, they kind of shake me warmly by the hand. So, there's always that nervousness. It is gratifying. And also, this was a lone battle. And it's nice to feel that others feel as strongly as I do about some of these issues. I'm not the sort of lone character who was kind of easily dismissed as a bit of an outlier and a bit of a nutter. And people call me all sorts of things, closet Marxist, a Republican. But actually, I'm just a monarchist who wants the monarchy to survive, but wants integrity in public life and wants it to reform so it's actually fit for purpose for the 21st century. And so the good work that many of them do is not overshadowed by these grifters, basically.
I think I love this. I think know so many people who might only have seen you for the first time on an Instagram clip or on TikTok, but hearing firsthand the fact that you're seeking that integrity, that you're actually a monarchist, even though you are looking for the stories that at the moment are fundamentally, corrosive to the monarchy, I think that's particularly illuminating. Again, there is so much to dissect. First of all, did you nearly give up? Did you ever want to stop? Did you come close to thinking this is not worth it?
No, I think I'm just a very stubborn, tenacious person, so I never give up. I describe myself as the Winslow boy meets Erin Brockovich. And if you remember in the Winslow boy, the boy is innocent, but he's prepared, and the father fighting for the boy is prepared to sacrifice everything. The family have to give up, his sister can't get married and someone drops out of university and all sorts of things because he feels very strongly that the truth is the truth and you shouldn't give in. So no, I do keep going. This isn't the first battle I've had against the establishment. When I did my book on the Mountbattens, which came out in 2019, the government had basically, with government money, public money, Southampton University had bought for £5 million the private diaries of Lord and Lady Mountbatten, who were the subject of my book. Now, I felt that these papers should be available. They'd been available to scholars in the past when the Mountbatten family had them. People were actually able to go and look at them at Broadlands. And then it seemed to me appalling that we bought these papers and yet they were closed. And I went to the Information Commissioner. Often I have fights right through the whole process of freedom of information, through to the Information Commissioner and even to the first tier tribunal where I represent myself, often as one person against a phalanx of lawyers. I won. The Information Commissioner ruled that this stuff should be released. The government then, for some reason, Cabinet Office said there's a ministerial directive that prevents these 33,000 pages from being released that we bought. And they challenged it. And the Information Commissioner, who basically is paid by the Cabinet Office, it's a ridiculous system, didn't decide to fight this because clearly they were going to fight their boss, who was starving them of resources and money and staff and all sorts of things to limit what they could do. So I decided to fight this on the basis that I would get my costs back. And I was hit with a £500,000 legal bill. And at that point, I didn't get the legal costs as I expected. So I had to pay it and had to remortgage my house and do all sorts of things. And so my wife, clearly, understandably, is a bit nervous of my kind of standing up against these people. But it's all about bullies, really. And it goes back to school, seeing bullies operate and being able to get away with it. And seeing, because I'm sort of half in and half out of the establishment, seeing elites able to do what suits them. And I think that's why people are so upset by what's going on with Prince Andrew and Epstein and others. Here were rich and powerful people being able to do exactly what they wanted with disadvantaged young girls, vulnerable people, and they could just behave in the most appalling ways, knowing that they had law enforcement covered, that no one would come after them. And it's sort of what Trump does. He tried to do it on my book, where he put pressure on the publishers because of a reference to him and Melania in the book, which is completely accurate. But he threatened them with a lawsuit, and they backed off. Now, if it had been me, I think I would have fought it. But I can see, you don't want to get bogged down in lawfare. You don't want to spend not just the money, but the time on this. So, understandably, they back down. But I think that's wrong. So many people keep backing down. It's very important that we all make a stand against basically these bullies.
It feels more important than ever, right? We talk a lot on this show about the era that we're in, this kind of post-social, post-truth, this kind of nascent use of AI. But the seeking of truth has never been more important. And just as so many newspapers are succumbing to billionaire ownership, or just as we see this kind of preserve of what truth even is get lost in the fog of social media, it's like never been more important. It feels like what you are working on and what you have been tireless and relentless in doing is pulling on a thread of such an important moment beyond Prince Andrew, for example. Would that be right? And are you filled with hope at the moment that this is a deck of cards that is going to sort of fall down, or is it almost hopeless that it is too entwined, if you like, that the machinations of the people at the top are sort of too severe and too fierce? Like, tell us a bit more about the establishment, the hope that we've got for truth to reveal itself.
Yeah, well, I am hopeful because I think we've got the power of social media, which I think has pushed this along, has forced the mainstream press to be slightly more sort of questioning about what goes on, and giving them a confidence, I think, too.
So do the mainstream media have to take note and have to shine or hold a mirror up, if you like, when the noise of social is so strong?
I think so. I think the pressure comes, and then we've got the podcasters, we've got the Substack, we've got all those citizen journalists. I mean, you're doing fantastic work on, for example, social media now, going through the Epstein leaks. They're the ones who are looking at some of the darker bits of the story, which mainstream media have kind of shied away from because it just feels impossible to
Because
believe.
it's unpalatable for newspapers. Would that be right?
I'm cautiously hopeful that things are going to change. I mean, I think what we will see is the royal family, for example, will agree to certain concessions. It may be that they will look again at the exemptions in the Freedom of Information Act. They may agree to a little bit more parliamentary scrutiny. But it's interesting. We had that debate on Andrew the other day, but only because he was an ordinary citizen. No one is being able to ask questions about other members of the royal family yet. And that, I think, needs to come.
So that's, excuse ignorance, that is because of their title and position. And it's only since he is now Andrew Mountbatten, the former prince, it's only since then that we're allowed to scrutinise in the way that we're. Because public opinion feels very... I was sat with the brand in my other sort of world, as it were, when the Andrew news came in. And I was with a bunch of kind of brand marketeers, people in CSR at a brand, between probably 35, 55 years old, 8 or 9 of them around the table. There was an audible cheer when he got arrested in the news feed, and it was quickly reported and went round like wildfire around a room. In other words, none of these were necessarily anti-royalist or anti-monarchy, but there was a deep-seated desire for what's right and true, I believe, right now.
Yes, I agree. And powerful to be held to account.
At the press, though, because I want to get actually into, I love the comments you're making on the likes of Substack and podcasts, and I just want to get into that in a sec. But tell me a little bit more about mainstream media and all of this. And I know we can't tar everyone with the same brush, but is there still... I assumed it was an old-fashioned thing that the establishment, inverted commas, would be able to hold such power over what stories are carried or not. Is that exactly the same today as it was in the 80s, for example?
So the Telegraph have chased various stories. The Mail on Sunday have been very good. Guardian is good. The Independent at the moment has been much more robust about particularly think pieces and comment pieces, and New Statesman raising the question of the monarchy's future, the need for more accountability. Those sort of bits weren't being written about even 6 months ago when my book came out. So there is change. I think at the same time, there is the power of the palace to still shape the narrative.
So it still has a power.
Absolutely. So, I mean, they have, for example, when they filmed the Queen's funeral, they filmed the coronation, the BBC have basically people from the palace looking over their shoulder saying, these are the shots that you can show and these are the ones you can't show. We're not going to picture them getting out of the the state coach and the dress going up, whatever it is. And they control, again, what is shown on television. So there is a sort of state censorship there. And we see it, I write in my book entitled about ABC Television in the States, having years ago an interview with Virginia Giuffre, wanting a right to reply with Andrew, and basically the palace threatening them, saying, look, if you run this, we will never again get access to the royal family. And ABC bowed to that pressure. And of course, all the way through the last 15 years, the palace have denied stories which were demonstrably true, not least recently the Sun's front page that Charles contributed to the £12 million settlement for Virginia Giuffre. And they then issue legal threats. I mean, I've been on the end of some of those. I had legal letters from Ferguson's lawyer even before the book came out. They also then use their powers of patronage and pressure. So patronage, for example, you're given access to stories. They often will leak stories against other members of the royal family to kind of protect what they call the principals. So William will be protected, but they'll leak against Harry.
And that's common practice.
That's common practice, and it's known. Sarah Ferguson, for example, was very close to the Sun, and so she would feed stories about various people, including, for example, about Diana. The patronage is, you will have royal correspondents who are deputy lieutenants, which is again sort of like the assistants, the representatives of the royal family in various bits of the country. You'll have them being given quangos. You'll have them being given rewards of some sort. The royal family have their own order, the Royal Victorian Order, which they can give to staff as a sort of thank you instead of basically paying them properly. We had Charles, the cash for honours. If you give money for Dumfries House, we can arrange a knighthood or a CBE. And it seems extraordinary that in a modern democracy, the monarch has the power to influence honours like that. And I'm a great believer that anyone who is in this sphere, who is a journalist or a writer, or should not be accepting honours from the state. I mean, by all means, have the honours from your peers. But not from the state, because I think then that opens you up to the accusation that you can be bought. And I'm afraid so many people in public life can be bought so easily. We saw that with Peter Mandelson, 10,000 here paying for a course. And that is what is so rotten.
I mean, people like my son, he's 16 years old. I feel like Gen Z find them this sort of peculiarity completely on the periphery of their life. This sort of, zoo-like existence they might look into occasionally, have no real understanding of why it exists or its history, but just know it's kind of always been there. For me, in my 40s, I've seen them almost like this quaint, old-fashioned sidebar, this kind of trigger for gossip columns now and again that didn't really hold a huge interest for myself, but I assumed it probably did some good for a country. I like the fact that people from abroad would take interest in it and perhaps found a sense of pride that they did, because it made Britishness feel like it had more importance. I think what you're describing there, the commercial infrastructure that exists, let alone the ability to control media and aspects of it, is a kind of startling thought when you really dissect it.
Well, I describe them sometimes as the Mafia. They call themselves the firm, but I've been watching The Godfather, and it is the same. They are ruthless in the way they operate, and they do curate the record. And as you say, it's a business. And we see this even with Sarah Ferguson and Andrew. They've passed the business on to the daughters. Daughters have got the business cards, and they're now using the contacts to develop the family business. Another generation. It's a family firm.
Do you see, you mentioned, and I know you've of course written about Melania Trump, and you've had lawsuits from Donald Trump himself, but is he trying to almost replicate a monarchy? Is he a mafia in his governance?
Absolutely, and very unpredictable. He's a megalomaniac, and there's always a sidebar. It's nothing to do with public service. And I think what drives me is I do believe in public service. I think we've got terrific public servants, and it's about actually the destruction of public service. So the politicization of the intelligence services or the army, civil service. That there isn't this disinterested group of people who go in to serve the nation, which is what the monarchy should be about. It's everyone in it for themselves, and it becomes a sort of greasy pole. And that I find rather depressing. But I mean, to go back to one of your questions about will the establishment basically kibosh this, I think they might.
Can they? Do they still have the power in a world of Substack and Discord and Reddit threads and...
I mean, we're already getting a narrative created that, was Andrew was he really a public servant? They're bringing misconduct in public office, but the terms of his reference, the terms of the appointment, I'm not sure, he was seconded as a royal. So I'm not sure, they'll say misconduct in public office doesn't apply. In any case, misconduct in public office, yes, we're pursuing this, but it's a very difficult, very high bar on this. And of course, the penalties aren't very high. One extreme, it's life imprisonment, but most people only get 2 or 3 years. The police had so many opportunities to investigate some of the claims, including Virginia Giffey's claim. I mean, they claimed it wasn't their jurisdiction, but the fact is this was all ridiculous. And I put an FOI request, and they said we wouldn't even answer whether they had investigated. So, and we had the former head of Royal Security, Di Davis, saying this needs to be looked at. There's a case here for years. So, I mean, they had to do something. But this is a very convenient way. They can now say, well, we are looking at it. It does mean it's going to have to go to be sub judice, so we can't have people reporting on it now for a while. So that kind of shuts the story down. And if anything does come, they'll say, well, he's not going to get a fair trial, or we can't, sex trafficking, we can't find the girls, they aren't prepared to give evidence. There are lots of excuses they can give, because the last thing the royal family wants is all their dirty linen washed in public. But I think there's a very clear case for treason here. I mean, he was giving away diplomatic and, in effect, military secrets. I think that there are other charges that could be brought, which I think are much more serious and could stick. Now, maybe the police will do that, but I get the feeling this has been kicked into the long grass.
So you think they might not be allowed to do the job that we as the watching public want them to do? Because if they are allowed, and the noise is as deafening as it has been in recent weeks and months, which people like yourself have very much been a part of, that noise surely can get so deafening. Is there an extreme version? Could the king's position be in peril?
So I think they will find a way to shut the story down. I think that Andrew is a flight risk, that he will go abroad, rather like King Juan Carlos. That's the easy solution to this, to go somewhere where he can't be extradited and he's under the radar and everyone begins to forget about him and he can't talk. But if it's seen that the royal family have enabled that escape because they're meant to be keeping an eye on him, then there will be public anger. But I think they'll say it's always about distancing themselves from any scandal. I'm sorry, we hadn't realized we'd left the back gate open. He did escape. This is appalling. We're going to look into it. But, by that stage, he's safely somewhere where no one can come after him.
It would be so absurd, wouldn't it, if that ends up being the case? It's both hard to imagine and entirely predictable too.
Exactly. But that will be the lesser of the two evils. And this is the problem. Andrew's between a rock and a hard place because if he gives any testimony, he implicates himself. The royal family in a hard place because if they cooperate too much and get all the PPOs and protection officers speaking, they will say, well, we knew about this, we reported back, and nothing was ever done. If Andrew goes into the witness box and says, well, my family knew about this and they didn't seem too worried about it, why are they suddenly concerned about it now? And that's the story that the royal family wants to shut down. And it'll be interesting to see how they do that, because now it's not just me, a lone voice, it's many other people saying the same thing.
Our Prime Minister said that no one should be above the law. Do you believe that as truthful sentiment?
I don't trust any of these things.
Really?
I don't trust when Charles says, let the law take its course. That's it's window dressing. It's all smoke and mirrors. This is what they do in public, and what they actually do in private are two very, very different things. I actually was at a discussion dinner on the monarchy the other day with the former communications secretary to the monarch, 2 members of the House of Lords, one an ex-cabinet minister, a royal writer, people who work very closely with royal charities and things. And it's extraordinary how these people are so blinkered. I was saying there's corruption in the centre of the royal family. They protected Andrew from these sex trafficking things, what they say, and they just don't want to see it. And I've kind of had, those things lifted from my eyes in the course of my research. And because I'm probably quite a sort of stubborn person, Whereas I think they are more prepared to run with the flow and be more accepting. That's how the world works, and clearly if we do cause a fuss, we're not going to get advancing in our careers.
Sure, there's no world you can foresee in the near future where the establishment simply doesn't exist in the way that it once did. You're worried that the establishment will find a way to remain the establishment and to have its authority and power that it's had for years.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see this with Trump, the way he's been able to take over the Department of Justice, that he can do executive orders. He sacks people in the army or the diplomatic service or the DOJ who disagree with him, are trying to just do their jobs independently. And there are enough sycophants and people who will go off and pick up immigrants off the streets or do his bidding. And I think that's what's worrying. Maybe there's more scrutiny and we're more aware of it. But I do think there was this period, and I think until reasonably recently, of an independent, for example, civil servant, of people serving the elected officials, but in a pretty dispassionate way. And I think those days are going, sadly. Because anyone who stands up against any of these things finds that they lose their job. And that was the pressure that was being put on people, for example, around Andrew, that they were threatened with their pensions or the accommodation that came with their jobs, or being discredited. Princess Diana's private secretary, when he spoke out, stories were leaked about an affair he had and his marriage broke up. And that happens.
So I remember when I was probably 14, 15, and I first saw JFK, Oliver Stone's movie. And I was lucky enough many, many years later to be at a dinner where I could ask Oliver Stone a question. And I said, until I saw that movie, I was so naive. I just believed the world I lived in. And I was, as I say, a teenage boy then. And I saw that and thought, oh, every single thing I've ever been taught just doesn't appear to be true. Now, I'm not saying the movie was 100% factually correct, but it was definitely along the lines that everything I was taught was not the case. We moved into an era in the 2010s where conspiracy and conspiracy theory was like this all-pervading topic. I almost don't want to go there using that terminology, because I think what's most interesting now is, A, so much of what was discussed is coming true. But perhaps more importantly is the means with which we can converse and tell stories and share narrative and trade our comms. We mentioned right at the start of this, I think I said that you're across every one of my feeds right now, and I meant that with a great compliment. What is your kind of understanding of that space and how you can get your message out there right now?
Well, I mean, I have my sort of 15 minutes of fame. I mean, I've been trying to, fighting this lone battle for a decade, and this is my opportunity to get that debate, more generally into the wider media. We have this advantage that we can control some of these stuff ourselves. I mean, through social media. I mean, it's interesting, the royal family have moved away from mainstream media and briefings towards actually their own channels, and they can direct the picture and they can get huge followings. I use Twitter. I mean, it can be very abusive, but I use it to share information, sometimes to try and answer incorrect things that are said about me or anything else. I have a Substack column which gives me a little bit more space to develop arguments or to pinpoint things.
Substack feels like almost the thread right now for so many, because there's a longer form. Do you find that's a particularly fertile space?
It's thoughtful in a way that clearly Twitter isn't, because it is longer. But I mean, I generally will accept invitations from lots of people. I'm accused of being Republican. I'm not, but I will, for example, do events with Republic, because that clearly is an audience that are interested in my book. Doesn't mean I share those views. As an agent, a literary agent, I represent a wide variety of books, everything from the far left to the far right. Not because they reflect my views, but because I believe that everyone, should be allowed to make their argument, and then you can challenge it.
Surely that's right, isn't it? I feel like I need to understand those sides of the conversation.
Exactly. Otherwise, it's just an echo chamber. And you can, you constantly adjust your position in the light of information. I mean, there was a piece today in the Mail, interestingly enough, about Trump and going into Iran. Now, they made quite an interesting argument about how there was a bigger game here about sending a message out to China. So I thought that, that was interesting. I'm careful about some places that I don't talk. I don't do Russian television, for example. the places my publishers are nervous about me talking to people who are quite sort of controversial.
I find that interesting. Would the appetite be there to do Russian
Yes,
TV?
I have. A friend of mine actually is one of the presenters, and I have in the past. I did a book on Guy Burgess, and I did appear on
course.
that. And that seemed relevant. And my experience was John Pilger was also being interviewed just before me. So they have some serious people. But anyway, the feeling was that wasn't probably something to do. I've done George Galloway in the past, and the feeling was perhaps it wasn't wise to do George Galloway. But I'm a great believer in engaging with as many different people as possible.
What does journalism look like now for students? Because it's entirely different, right, in terms of the mediums that they're playing in and how they can actually explore. Are you thinking, no, actually, it's exactly the same as it might have been in the 70s for Watergate? We are seeking truth. You are piecing bits of story together. You are having to find those sources and have actual face-to-face conversations. And that's no different from it was 40 years ago.
Well, I think the journalists are the same, and my son's a journalist, and I think that's what sort of drives him, the story and the truth, and some of the things I believe in. I mean, I think the money isn't there, the resources where you had lots of journalists on a story, and you could pay large sums of money, for example, to serialize books. That's gone. That's affected publishing. Lawfare has affected it. People shy away, particularly in publishing, from dealing with controversial subjects. I tried to do a biography as an agent of Farage. People were nervous. People were nervous a book on David Beckham because it's just not worth the hassle. And that's a shame.
Of the sheer amount of legal...
They just throw up all sorts of obstructions and make life difficult. And,
Do you think Farage requires that kind of scrutiny, bearing in mind the scrutiny that you've given someone like the former Prince Andrew? Do you think someone who might be the next Prime Minister of the country frankly needs to be dissected in a way that...
Absolutely, and the links he's got with Russia, all those things, absolutely.
Do you fear that won't be given the kind of transparent sort of approach that is needed before it's too late?
Yeah, I think, we may have a situation like, the way that Trump was kind of infiltrated in and through various means, won elections, which I don't think, should we say, I don't think it was a completely level playing field. And I think the same thing's happening in this country. And extremist politicians who offer easy fixes are increasingly attractive. And I think we need to bring all of them under scrutiny, whatever political.
I agree. Surely scrutiny with equal weighting. Does it feel at the moment that there's a surprising weighting to frankly platform and elevate a certain party and a certain individual, in the case of Farage, with very little scrutiny? This kind of reflex response about because they're popular feels very sort of self-fulfilling because you're making someone popular. Where does that come from?
Well, I mean, they just have good communications, and he seems a very affable figure. I don't want to compare him to Adolf Hitler, but if you look, there's an authoritarianism there. There's a playing on prejudice, but there's also a sort of economic socialism there, nationalising industries and paying. I think they're going to pay the two-child benefit and stuff. So, but I mean, I just know from my own experience, my son as a young journalist was sent to interview him at the party conference and wrote a perfectly fair, dispassionate piece. And Farage didn't like it, and he complained to my son's boss. And my son kept his job, but I think it was difficult for a young guy in his 20s to have that sort of pressure being put. And that's a sort of sinister bullying that goes on with these people. So behind that affable smile, I think there's a pretty ruthless character, and that needs to be examined, whether it's in a book or in articles or television programs, whatever.
Yeah, that examination is so necessary. When you talk about your son in that position, and that would make me both fiercely protective but also full of perhaps hope, because as ever, it always feels like we pass on that baton to those younger than us, and whether it be our sons or our daughters, to carry a torch and hope that they start to make a better world than the one that we're currently in. Give us a bit of hope. Give the viewers and the listeners of this podcast, give us perhaps the more positive side. What might go right in the coming months and years?
Well, I mean, we are holding some powerful people to account, and we've seen people resigning as a result of the Epstein leaks in the States. We do have, I think, a slightly more emboldened press who are prepared to ask questions. We do have the whole sort of lawfare thing is being challenged. and we have more people prepared to work pro bono to deal with it, more lawyers who are prepared to do stuff. I've had the benefit of that myself with one or two cases. I had a case which we tried to take to Strasbourg, which would have challenged Article 10, and a very good barrister called Greg Callis did all this pro bono. So that, there are a lot of good guys out there, and there are a lot of things going on. My son was involved in setting up the equivalent of the Free Speech Union with other young people, and that gets a lot of support. I think people feel increasingly aware that we have to have free speech, which we didn't always have in, for example, the universities, and that I hope is changing. So there are a lot of signs there of things, and I think if we get the mass, if there are enough people who can put pressure on the media, on politicians, then the change can come. There are more people interested in it too. I was the only one on the barricades for a long time. There are many more people on the barricades now, and that's great.
Can you tell us a little bit about suing an actual publisher, and because they're big things to just go and embark on, right?
Everyone said to me, look, you don't sue Simon & Schuster. And they've got huge resources. Anyway, I decided I would sue them for breach of contract because I felt it was a really strong principle. I thought I was going to break the American market. I had a nice big deal with Simon & Schuster, huge resources that they would have. The book here entitled went to #1. In fact, it was #1 on Kindle even a few days ago, 6 months after publication. In the States, I thought we would get into top 10 and I'd have the power of Simon Schuster behind me. They bought the book on a finished manuscript, and then literally 2 or 3 months before the book was due to come out, they said this is unacceptable. Collins were very happy with it. So whatever happens, I think it just gained back to Bullies.
So were they lent on?
Well, there are some suggestions that they were up for sale and they didn't want any controversial books on the kitty. I've spent 40 years defending the rights of authors against corporate bodies, generally publishers, behaving badly. And so it would look ridiculous if I just bowed to them. I'm probably going to end up spending all my money on lawyers, but I prefer to do that and I'll get some settlement, but probably I won't get the sort of money I would have got if it had gone through Simon & Schuster. It's estimated I would have earned about $2 million, which I've lost.
I mean, it's not small change. I mean, I think you carry such integrity to put your money where your mouth is, literally in that way, to stand for what you have been saying for so many decades. I think it's hugely admirable.
Well, I mean, I'd look a complete hypocrite if I didn't do that. So, I would be setting a terrible example. It would undermine everything that I stood for and I've done in the last 40 years. And it's why I fought the case on the Mountbatten. There was nothing in it for me. My book had been published. But I think it was important that we have these documents, 33,000 pages, the most important collection of papers after Winston Churchill's papers, and they should be available to scholars and people. I got caught because I didn't get my fees, but I still feel that was worth doing.
You've built quite the army, that's for sure. There'll still be a lot of people watching and listening to this who this is the first experience of hearing you and seeing you talk. Where can they best find you?
Well, I'm always interested to hear from people. I have the benefit of a rather unusual surname. So basically, they just Google my name. It'll come up. I have a website for the agency. I have a website for the book, andrewlownie.me. I have the Substack, The Lownie Report. I have a YouTube channel, The Lownie Report. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I think I'm on Instagram. I do TikTok. So
even if you're not trying, you definitely are across those platforms.
So they can find me. I mean, that was one of the problems when I talked to security people. They said everyone can find you so easily, and that's good. It is gratifying to feel that other people share the values I think are important, and if we all come together, I think we can make some change.
I think that's a fantastic note to end on. Andrew, thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure.
Storyco is presented by me, James Kirkham. It's sponsored by TYX Studios in London, with special thanks to Jack Freegard, Panos Agamemnos, Craig Hepston-Stall and Tyler Newton. It's produced by Jago Lee, production managed by Archan Mohile, and was developed by Issa Gibson. Our theme music is by Doubt Point. It's a Telltale Industries production.